I get a lot of calls from families where their family member went in for something that appeared to be routine and never came out.
Hi everyone, welcome back to this week's episode of Take a Pain Check. Today's guest is ranked as a personal injury litigation lawyer. Shane represents people who suffer from chronic pain through an honest, friendly, and approachable manner. Shane, I'm very excited to have you today on Take a Pain Check. Can you start off by telling me a little bit about yourself, your background, your education, and what you've been up to professionally?
Absolutely. So I'm a personal injury lawyer at the law firm of Singer Quinter. We're based out of the GTA, but we have clients all over the province of Ontario. I did my undergrad at the University of Western. I think it was in business, now that I look back. And I then went to Queen's Law School and got my law degree from Queen's. And I've pretty much been practicing at Singer Quinter ever since July 2004. Time flies.
Wow.
Grew up in Hamilton and moved to Toronto after law school.
Thanks so much for sharing kind of your academic journey. Why did you want to get into law school and law? And then also, why did you decide to, take a look into more specifically injury law?
Great question. So my father is a doctor, and growing up, I was always intrigued by doctors' abilities to help people and heal them and provide care. Unfortunately, I didn't follow the medical school path, but when I was in high school in Hamilton, I worked for my cousin who had his own law firm in Hamilton, and I would just be a summer student essentially. And some of the work he did was for people who suffered personal injuries, and I kind of learned that although I'm not a doctor, it is a way to help people that are suffering, medically. So working for my cousin gave me the idea of going to law to help people. And, when I was in law school, I remember taking a course about insurance law. And, that I really enjoyed learning about insurance law as opposed to property law, and all those other types of law that you learn in law school. And I realized that personal injury was the closest I could get to helping people without being in the medical field.
Yeah, I think there's definitely different pathways on how you can help people. And so it's great that you're able to find your own path. But I wanted to talk a little bit about common misconceptions. So, what are some of the most common misconceptions that people have about personal injury law?
So personal injury law, I would say, especially in the GTA, Greater Toronto Area, for those maybe you aren't in the GTA, it has a bad rep, especially these days, where people see personal injury lawyers more as ambulance chasers, slip and fall lawyers. But what the public doesn't realize is that personal injury lawyers can only get paid if they get their clients money. And on the other side of cases, they're dealing with insurance companies that have employees that are incredibly intelligent. Insurance companies have millions and millions of dollars at their disposal to defend claims. So for a personal injury lawyer to just take, fraudulent or silly claims, as the rap would suggest, I don't think accurately depicts the situation. And most of the time, these lawyers are working for people who could not otherwise afford to pay a lawyer by the hour. And, these lawyers are waiting years to make a single dollar on a file, and they may not even make a dollar if they're unable to recover any money for the client. That's probably the biggest misconception. The public needs to realize that personal injury lawyers don't get paid unless they get their client money. They're going up against very sophisticated insurance companies that aren't going to pay fraudulent or silly claims. I think that would help with that issue. I know that there's a lot of advertising that occurs on TV, on buses. My firm is even on buses as well. But I think advertising, as opposed to affecting that misconception, if it's done tastefully, can help educate the public as well on those issues.
So, when someone is dealing with a chronic illness or injury, at what point should they consider legal representation?
The issue for the person suffering from the injury is what caused the injury. So if the person believes that their injury and their ongoing suffering was caused by a third party, another person, a company, they may want to speak with a lawyer to see if there's a possibility of obtaining compensation for the injuries and suffering that this third party caused to them. And that's usually through negligence law, right? In our society, we have, a reasonable person standard. So if somebody failed to act reasonably or didn't act reasonably, and that action or inaction has caused you injuries and suffering, you may have a right to claim compensation from that individual or entity. The other issue is if somebody's suffering from injuries and the symptoms associated with them, they may have other avenues to obtain assistance. They may have access to insurance that can help provide income benefits if they're unable to work. They may have access to health insurance to pay for treatment and medication. And if they're having difficulty with their insurance company with respect to those types of claims, they should also consult a lawyer and see if the lawyer can help them deal with the insurance company.
And then a lot of the times, patients have emotional needs and have been going through a lot. And so, how do you, as a lawyer, then balance legal strategy with the emotional needs of these clients, especially those that are navigating health related trauma?
It's definitely something you need to keep top of mind, right? My job is to think objectively, think reasonably, and give my clients advice accordingly. And, a lot of the time, my clients are suffering from life altering injuries and ongoing symptoms that have, drastically changed their quality of life and will do so indefinitely. And it's hard to help that person think objectively and reasonably. So I guess what I try to do is let them know initially that I'm always there for them. They're welcome to contact me anytime, and I'll do my best to get back to them within 24 hours. And that, I think, helps them realize that there's somebody there for them for any issue and for peace of mind. I try to remind clients that, I'm there to try to show them and advise them on the right course of action. And, I try to remove the emotional aspect when giving my advice. And if I can remind them of that and help them understand that, I can hopefully help guide them in the right direction to resolving their claims in a way that's best for them. All I can do is get my clients money. That's all I can do. I can't get them their health back. I can't get them their life back, but I can try to get them enough money to help them deal with their ongoing symptoms as best they can, and to try and live and maintain a quality of life that is better than the one they're currently dealing with.
Can you walk me through what makes medical malpractice case viable?
Doctors in Ontario have an insurance company called the Canadian Medical Protective Association. And the Canadian Medical Protective Association believes, rightfully or wrongfully, that they need to defend a doctor's reputation at all costs. And they take that approach to claims whereby, unfortunately, they don't necessarily deal with claims in perhaps a reasonable or efficient manner. So it's important for people to realize that if they get involved in medical malpractice litigation, that they're likely going to have to go through years of unpleasant and risky litigation. But in terms of viability, the first thing that a lawyer should be doing with their client in a medical malpractice situation is conducting an initial investigation with the appropriate medical experts to determine if there's a case. And this should be done before anything else is done with the case. Because usually the person themselves doesn't have the necessary education or experience to confirm whether the doctor was negligent. The lawyer is not a doctor, doesn't have the medical experience to confirm whether the doctor was negligent. And only a medical expert with the relevant background and experience can do so. And so an initial investigation has to be done to determine if there's a case. And only then do you know if it's viable.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I wanted to ask you, like what kind of medical errors do you see most often in your practice?
I do get a lot of calls about failure to diagnose. Those are interesting cases, but they're difficult ones because you have to prove that the failure to diagnose something was negligence, fell below the standard of care, and you also have to prove that had the condition been diagnosed sooner, the outcome would have been different. So those are interesting cases. I get a lot of calls about poor outcomes, so surgical related, disease related, where people believe that because they had a poor outcome, the doctor must have been negligent. And I explained to the client about medical misfortune, right? Medical misfortune is where you get a bad result or bad outcome occurs without any negligence, and that's why the initial investigation is so important, because you need to determine, was there negligence that caused the poor outcome, or what is it, medical misfortune?
Have you noticed like reoccurring patterns or systemic issues in the healthcare system that contribute to malpractice?
Yeah, that's a good question. I do get a lot of scary calls about people's experiences in hospitals. Hospitals seem to be a little overwhelmed, leading to what appears to be people simply dying. And I get a lot of calls from families where their family member went in for something that appeared to be routine and never came out. And I can't speak to the policy decisions going on there, but everyone's kind of heard the horror stories of wait times and um, just what appears to be poor treatment in the hospital setting.
Yeah, there's so many patients that definitely share a lot about that because it's just so common to feel like you're not being treated well or even have different experiences where you actually aren't being treated well. And so I'm glad that there are people like you who help patients like that in case that they need anything. You are known for your compassionate approach. I mean, I think we've been kind of talking about this. And so I wanted to ask, like, you've kind of mentioned a little bit about this, but a little bit more. I wanted to know more about, how do you create that sense of safety and trust with clients who already feel vulnerable because of what they've experienced?
Well, it's important to be calm. It's important to communicate in a timely manner. I get a lot of calls from people who want to switch lawyers because their lawyer isn't communicating with them, isn't getting back to them. And clients really, really appreciate that timely communication. It helps build trust, and makes your client feel comfortable that you're there for them in doing the job. I try to remind clients that any time that they have a question or concern, to reach out to me about anything. Um, I don't want them to feel that you know they're bothering me, or that I'm too busy for them. They need to know that I'm there, and any question or concern I'll deal with, and they like knowing that as well. I think I provide comfort by managing expectations as well, properly informing the client about all stages of the process, the pros and cons of each stage, the potential outcomes of each stage. Because a fully informed client as well uh, is one that is comfortable and more at ease with the situation.
I think that's just in general too, like anyone just being informed, even in the healthcare setting, like you're able to make better decisions about your own health and like just getting the most information, having options and really understanding everything to the best of your abilities can only really like lead you to success. And so I think this kind of method or approach of being compassionate is very applicable to multiple settings and not in just this one. How has working with medically complex cases shaped the way that you practice law?
I think it's helped me be more sympathetic, empathetic, understanding, appreciative, grateful. Um, you are essentially dealing with people that are suffering on a daily basis and are having difficulty enjoying life. So, you put things in perspective in your daily life, and you develop a drive to try and help these people as best you can, and get satisfaction from that.
What role does collaboration with medical and rehab professionals play in building a strong case?
So this goes back to what I was just saying. It's especially in the motor vehicle injury world, you want to make sure your clients are getting appropriate care. There's obviously a desire to get a great outcome, because that puts more money in your client's pocket, it puts more money in the lawyer's pocket. But I think most personal injury lawyers would also say that they also want to make sure that their client is recovering well, or is put in a position to recover as best they can. Um, and so you need to have a good roster of people available in the healthcare industry who can make themselves available and be there for your clients if needed. If a client is unhappy with the treatment they're getting, you can refer them to other potential treatment facilities that can hopefully address their needs in a better way.
Uh,
If their family doctor is not listening or responding, or getting them referrals they need, you can try and help them maybe get a referral to a specialist or to a chronic pain facility to hopefully get them the treatment and care they need.
I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of legal literacy and empowerment. So, what advice would you give to someone who thinks they might have a claim but is kind of hesitant to pursue that legal action?
Well, I first want to understand what's making them hesitant. And to be honest, there's a lot to be hesitant in the personal injury insurance litigation world. The province of Ontario has a loser pay system. So if somebody starts a lawsuit and does not resolve it, and actually takes the case to trial and loses the trial, so the judge or jury decide against them, the court is going to order that person to pay whoever they sued's legal fees. So that's a big hurdle. That can be a big hurdle for people, especially if their injuries aren't catastrophic. Because unfortunately, somebody who's lost it all, that's a risk they're willing to face. But somebody who is suffering greatly but is still managing through life and has a lot to lose may have trouble with that type of system. And when you enter into the courts, you're usually going up against an insurance company with millions of dollars at their disposal to defend the case. So it's always a David and Goliath type of experience. And part of our job is to even the playing field through our advocacy and efforts. But it's a tough one to even when you're going up against a powerful insurance company, and pretty much every type of personal injury litigation or insurance litigation, that's what's happening. So I'd want to get a better understanding of why they're hesitant. Are they worried about the financial issues? And I talked to them about the loser pay system, and that there is insurance available that people can purchase that protects them up to a certain amount if they are ordered to pay legal fees. There's different names for this insurance: cost insurance, after the event insurance, but essentially for a certain premium amount, um, the person can have access to 100,000 or 200,000 or even more of coverage should they lose their case and have to pay legal fees to whoever they sued. And that can help even the playing field. In most cases, the person will be able to just walk away with nothing from the case, but they won't have to pay the other side. And that's something that is important for everybody to know. That's considering in litigation that they may not get anything from it, but in most cases they can walk away without having to pay anybody else anything as well. Should they, not want to proceed through the trial door and take on that risk of losing.
What is one thing that you wish all patients knew when it came to dealing with insurance companies?
So, insurance companies are a business, and that's something people need to understand. Now, there's obviously debate about what they're in the business to do. I would argue that they're in the business to pay claims. Some people might argue they're in the business to collect premiums and invest them. But they're a business, and they're made up of employees. Well, everybody has jobs to do, and it's important to remember that insurance company employees need to paper their files. The employee that you're dealing with as an employer, they have to be accountable to. And, I would say just make sure to paper their file. Give them what they need to pay your claim or pay you benefits or damages. Make sure they have stuff they can put in their file to show their boss as to why they're recommending paying you a certain amount of money. That's something very important to keep in mind.
Now, talking a little bit about advocacy, because I think that's a big thing in like being empowered and being able to actually, take that step to go reach out to insurance companies to find a lawyer to kind of start the process of anything, really. How can people advocate for themselves legally when facing resistance from insurers or medical institutions?
It's not easy, right? These institutions, these insurers, they're very, very powerful entities. I would always say it's better to get something with honey as opposed to vinegar. So you want to always be very calm and civil when you're dealing with people. Try to explain your issue or concern, because nobody can read your mind. So you want to articulate and get your points across. And you could always see if there's somebody at a higher level who can address your issue if you don't feel you're being heard properly or your issue isn't being addressed properly. But you're always welcome to call me, and see if I can advocate for you and help you. Obviously, we don't charge unless we get somebody money, and I'm happy to speak with anybody to see if I can help them.
Thanks so much for sharing this resource. It will definitely be meaningful to lots of patients and people who are kind of navigating issues like these. Can you share a case anonymously that has had a profound impact on you or a client, and that kind of reminded you, this is what I'm doing and this is why I'm doing it?
Yeah, I mean, specifically in the chronic pain context, chronic pain has a bit of a stigma associated with it in the insurance and personal injury world. It's known as invisible injuries if the chronic pain isn't resulting from a very severe objective injury. So you can have a client who is part of that very small percentage of people who suffered soft tissue injuries, but has not fully recovered within 6 months, like 95% of the population would have. And unfortunately, the insurance industry does not think very highly of these types of invisible injuries. And when you get through the trial door and you're dealing with a jury, You may get members of the public on that jury that have trouble believing and appreciating the suffering that the person's going through. They didn't break a bone. They didn't fracture a skull. They didn't tear any ligaments or tendons. Um, and my first realization about this issue, um, and the uphill battle that people suffering from chronic pain have, especially in situations where they're expected to have recovered, occurred very early on in my career when I was part of a trial for a young woman who had developed severe chronic pain after a motor vehicle accident, but she didn't have severe broken bones um, at the beginning. And the insurance company refused to pay a reasonable amount to resolve the claim, and the client went to trial. And she was a factory worker, and she couldn't return to work. She tried, but she couldn't because of the physical aspects of her job. And unfortunately, the jury blew her out, as it's called. Really didn't give her anything for her damages. And this is a young woman who was going to have trouble working for the rest of her life. So, early on in my career, I had that eye opener experience of how important it is to properly educate the jury, educate the insurance industry and the public about chronic pain and the real suffering that people are going through and dealing with.
Yeah, exactly. Given the nature of it just being invisible, it's really hard for people and patients living with pain to advocate for themselves because of potentially feeling that they're going to be dismissed. And so it makes it really hard for them to even want to take the next step or take action because they may lose hope. And so I'm glad that, we're raising awareness about it and we're saying that, there is possibility for you to be able to succeed and win those battles. And there are people to support you throughout the journey. And so is there anything else you want to share to our listeners that, we may not have covered today?
There's people like me out there. And, if in the litigation context, if you've been wronged and somebody has caused your suffering, reach out to people like me and see if we can help. You're not alone. And there's people like me out there that understand, and because of our clients and the experience that we have in representing people with chronic pain, we can help. We're there for you.
Thank you so much, Shane, for joining me on today's podcast episode and shedding a light on the often overlooked legal side of navigating injury, illness, and the healthcare system. Your insight into personal injury and medical malpractice law reminds us that advocacy doesn't just stop at the doctor's office. It really extends to the courtroom where dignity, compassion, and justice truly matters. So everyone, make sure to like, comment, subscribe. Check out Shane's links down below. And I'll see everyone next time on Take a Pain Check. Thank you so much, Shane.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.